estamos muy tristes por el fallecimiento de nuestro comandante y aunque esté muerto siempre va a seguir nuestro comandante.
Trump tiene que hacer el sentir del cubano, darle libertad al cubano, sacar a los Castro de allí que llevan muchos años por hacer algo que no es de ellos. Cuba tiene que ser libre y Trump es quien nos va a ayudar. ¡Viva Trump! ¡Viva Trump!
Es un dolor grande, era algo que tenía que suceder porque todos tenemos que morir, pero a veces nos cuesta trabajo asimilar que Fidel ha muerto.
Primeramente, esperemos que no haga las relaciones de unión como lo ha hecho el presidente actual Obama, cuando no hubo ningún tipo de cambio en el sistema de Cuba. Han dejado los presos políticos, existen aún en las cárceles, no hubo ningún tipo de cambio sobre eso.
You and I just got a sampling of different reactions to the death of Fidel Castro. Reactions from Havana, Cuba, and reactions from Little Havana in Miami, those Cuban exiles who came to the United States seeking freedom. Continuing now on Newsmax Prime, in the wake of Castro's death, we welcome via Skype from Miami community activist and political commentator Raul Mas. Raul, you have a personal story to tell. In fact, you shared it in an article you penned recently talking about the emotional trauma that Fidel Castro imposed on generations of Cubans. In this article, you discuss the many different emotions Cubans and Cuban Americans are facing in the wake of Castro's death. For you personally, tell us your story and thus your reaction to the death of Fidel Castro.
Listen, my story is a story of many Cubans whose parents fled the island. I was 3 years old when I left. I am now 59 years old. And I have spent my entire lifetime waiting for Fidel to pass away in the hopes that things will change in Cuba so that perhaps even though my parents did not get to see him pass into, another world, or hell if you ask me, maybe I at some point have the opportunity to take their remains and lay them on Cuban soil. I'm an American. I grew up in this country. I'm very proud of my adopted country. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful for all the opportunities that this country has blessed me with. But obviously, there's still a cord there. My Cuban heritage, that's where my family's from. And it was very emotional to finally see this day come and think about my parents, think about my late brother, Jorge Mas Canosa, who literally dedicated his entire lifetime fighting against Fidel, died way too young at around age 54 or 55 under mysterious circumstances. Some people suggest that perhaps Fidel had a hand in his death. And there's some, things that I've heard that make me believe that may in fact have happened. And so there's a lot of pain and anguish. I mean, people don't realize why it is that we're celebrating. We're celebrating because this is a man who basically for us has been sort of a mini Hitler, a mini Stalin. And you don't have to believe me. I mean, I urge your audience to go to cubaarchive.org and see the work of Maria Werlaw, whose father was killed by Fidel Castro. She has documented over 10,000 individuals who have died at the hands of Fidel and Raul Castro. And that number is widely understated because we don't know exactly how many people have died in the oceans trying to reach, America. We don't know how many people actually were killed in Angola when Fidel sent his troops over there to prop up a Soviet-led regime in Angola. So there's a lot of deaths that we've not even accounted for yet, but it's at least 10,000 over, the 57, 58 years that he's been there. And you can also go online and just Google, Fidel executions, and you'll see plenty of videos of, men and women being summarily, rounded up and then shot in front of a firing squad, oftentimes, for no good reason, simply because they were police officers or they were part of the military, whatever. They were just rounded up because Fidel, when he took power, wanted to take absolute control of the island and wanted to make, let people know that he was in charge, and he wanted to make a mockery of anybody who had been in the military or in the police and basically wipe them out without any sort of, due process of law, show trials in the form of Stalin. That is the legacy of Fidel Castro. That's why you're seeing...
And, you mentioned that word legacy, Raul, and in this country, we have a president about to leave office who thinks his legacy is reaching out to Cuba. Now, in stark contrast to President Obama, President-elect Trump has a very different outlook. Here's what the president-elect tweeted out today. Taking a look at it now, if Cuba is unwilling to make a better deal for the Cuban people, the Cuban-American people, and the U.S. as a whole, I will terminate that deal. Now, Raul, this comes one day after Senators Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio both said Mr. Trump should reevaluate the diplomatic overtures to Cuba now that Fidel is dead and now that Mr. Obama is about to leave office. Do you believe Donald Trump should stop what has gone on thus far and seek renegotiations with Raul Castro there in Cuba?
Listen, I think sort of, the horse is out of the barn already. I mean, it's a little bit too late to sort of turn back certain things that have already taken place. Although, of course, many of Obama's actions were simply executive actions that can be easily reversed. But the main reason to basically start putting pressure again on Fidel is very, very simple. If you talk to dissidents on the island, women like Ioanni Sanchez, who's probably one of the best-known dissidents on the island, I heard her speak here at the University of Miami just a few weeks ago. She said very clearly, nothing has changed in Cuba since Obama's opening. People are still getting beat up in the streets. Cubans are still fleeing the island. Cubans are still hungry, okay? So nothing has changed. I mean, my God, President Obama's ability to negotiate is no better than a 5-year-old at a lemonade stand during the summer. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, this guy cannot negotiate his way out of a paper bag if his life depended on it.
Well,
I mean,
but then that leads to this question, Raul. That leads to this question. Do you believe Mr. Obama, like so many on the left, has this type of affinity for Fidel and the myth that so many progressives embrace in this country and elsewhere about Fidel being, quote, the George Washington of Cuba?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the comments from, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, the comments from Jill Stein, the head of the Green Party, who's now asking for a recount, were absolutely disgusting. I mean, she basically closed her tweet by saying, presente, I'm here present as a member of the revolution, okay? This is a woman who was born in this country, educated at Harvard. She's a Harvard-trained medical doctor, and she considers herself some sort of a pseudo-revolutionary. My God, if that's how you really feel, go down to Cuba and practice medicine in that socialist paradise that you so adore, and forget trying to run for president or trying to have this sham recount that you now need in order to line your pockets with millions of dollars. Go to Cuba. Go to Cuba right now and practice medicine down there, Ms. Stein, if that's Dr. Stein, whatever you want to call yourself.
Well, you mentioned that fact, and it's worth remembering. Within the last decade, Michael Moore made a documentary extolling the so-called virtues of medicine in Cuba. Such disinformation embraced by the left in this country. Why do you think that's taken place, Raul?
Listen, I don't know. There seems to be an affinity among these sort of, pseudo-intellectuals that love the left, love revolutions, love to have, go around wearing T-shirts with Che Guevara's, picture on it, not knowing all the atrocities that he committed, and even this president. People don't realize this, but, I would venture to say that Raul Castro is probably the nastier of the two. Right? Raul Castro has actually killed people in cold blood, and that comes from Brian Littell, who was our CIA point man for 20, 30 years following the Castro brothers. He documented it in his book, that this is a man, Raul Castro, who has basically killed people in cold blood, and our president shook hands with him and struck a deal with him to open up Cuba again. It's disgusting. It is time for a real change in Cuba, and I am very hopeful that our new president-elect, Donald Trump, will in fact take a much harder line towards Cuba. And let me tell you, the stars are aligning because other things are happening, right? Venezuela is going down the tubes very, very quickly. Their financial support of Cuba has essentially dissipated over this last couple of years, which is one reason why the Castros were so anxious to reach out to the United States, right? And Venezuela's situation is not going to get better anytime soon. They've already defaulted on an upcoming interest payment.
This brings me back to the future of Cuba, Raul. As you take a look, with Raul Castro still in power, and you chronicled the nature of his depravity and violence, do you believe the Cuban people will ever get out from underneath the yoke of Castro? 20 seconds.
Listen, I hope so, and I think there's a lot of things that are going on in terms of communication, cell phones that allow people to organize and start hopefully a campaign to remove these octogenarians who are in control of the country. I think it'll happen, but I think it needs a push from us, quite frankly.
And on that hopeful note, Raul Mas, tonight from Miami. Raul, we appreciate your time. Still to come, YouTube sensations Diamond and Silk. That's ahead as Newsmax Prime continues.